What if everything you love was taken away in a single day? Would your faith still stand? Why the righteous suffer is an age-old and profound question that has persisted throughout human history. An Old Testament tale of Job's life is a powerful example of this contemplation. It depicts the account of a righteous and pious man who, with God's permission, goes through tremendous sufferings that Satan intends to destroy. The story leads us to consider our personal perspectives on divine justice and the significance of suffering. As we continue reading, we may see how Job's struggles and sufferings apply to our own. How often do we consider why certain deserving people succeed while others who aren't as good at it have it so easy? Neither the question nor our time are exceptional in this way. Countless people have been impacted by it throughout the years, as they consider the apparent contradiction between God's goodness and human suffering. Job's story teaches us a lot about faith, persistence, and man's relationship with the supernatural. It invites us to a deeper understanding of God's purpose and challenges us to reconsider our expectations of how life should be. The difficulties that Job faced remind us that our limited perspectives make it difficult for us to see the big picture as God does. In this tale, we may also observe a portion of the celestial conversation in which God allows Satan to test Job's faith. This section of the story causes us to reflect seriously on the nature of evil, God's sovereignty, and free will. Is it feasible that God uses difficulties to test our faith? How can we maintain our integrity when confronted with seemingly unfair trials? As we explore into these questions, keep in mind that Job's story does not offer simple answers. It encourages us to think more carefully about faith and divine justice. During times of uncertainty and hopelessness, we might find solace in Job's story, since he remained upright, even when he couldn't understand the causes of his adversity. Another lesson we can learn from Job's story is the importance of community in the face of adversity. Despite their erroneous advice, Job's friends demonstrate the importance of being there for someone when circumstances are bad. This teaches us to feel empathy for those in need, even when we don't know how to help them. One of Job's most significant lessons is that our faith should not be dependent on our external circumstances. Despite losing everything, Job remained committed to God. As a result, we must ask ourselves where our religion comes from. Is our religion strong enough to weather life's storms, or is it only expressed when things are going well? Job also addresses theodicy, or God's justification in the face of evil and suffering. Everyone has an opinion on why evil exists in a world created by a benign and powerful God. We hear it in Job's talks with his friends, and later with God himself. These discourses promote insights on God's character and our place in the universe. One of the most striking moments in the story is when God answers Job out of the storm. God chooses to demonstrate his incomparable wisdom and might by asking Job a series of questions, rather than providing a direct reason for his suffering. As a result, we are reminded that the solutions we seek are often illogical. Another lesson we can draw from Job's story is the importance of being humble in the presence of God. Job maintains his innocence, although he eventually regrets questioning God's ways. This does not imply that we should be inert in the face of suffering, but it does encourage us to face hardship with wonder and faith in God's greater purpose. The narrative's portrayal of retribution, or the concept that good actions always result in rewards and evil actions in penalties, is an interesting aspect of the story. Even if Job's companions hold this simple viewpoint, the story indicates that there is far more subtlety to the truth. As a result, we should reevaluate our approaches to reward and fairness. Do not limit Job's eventual restoration to the formula of suffer now, and you will be rewarded later. While this is an important aspect of the story, it is not the only one. Alternatively, we can see it as a manifestation of God's boundless love and kindness. This encourages us to have faith in God, no matter how we interpret his acts. Job's narrative also offers insights into how to cope with loss and suffering. When we are sad, we can take comfort in Job's example of dealing with hardship and frustration without abandoning our faith. God is great enough to handle our questions and doubts, so we may be open with him about how we feel. Finally, the narrative of Job teaches us to broaden our view on life and God's plan. It serves as a gentle reminder that our lives are meaningful, even if we don't always realize it. Rather than reducing our suffering, this offers a different perspective from which to face hardship with hope and courage. Looking at Job's story makes us rethink our own beliefs and responses to adversity. Is it possible to remain devoted to God, like Job did, even when we don't understand why we're going through this? Regardless of the problems we face in life, this great story never fails to inspire and guide us. Job's life in Uz demonstrated virtue and prosperity. He was rewarded both financially and spiritually, because he was one of the most influential men in the East. His enormous herds, which were a conspicuous indicator of prosperity at the period and location, proved his fortune. In addition to acting as a prestige symbol, these herds were essential to the overall economy, providing commodities for sale, clothing, and food. Job's family was equally exceptional. He was lucky to have a large family of 7 sons and 3 girls, which was highly valued in ancient times. Not only did he take immense joy in his large family, but they also served to protect his legacy and spread his influence in society. The household tranquility was evident as the children gathered for celebrations and feasts on a regular basis. Job's religious enthusiasm was a guiding principle throughout his life. In addition to openly professing his ideas, he actively lived them by performing cleansing rites for his children. He went above and beyond the call of duty to ensure his family's spiritual well-being through this practice. Job attempted to maintain his family in harmony with God and acted as a liaison between them and the divine. Everyone recognized Job's honesty. He had a reputation for being a man of integrity who feared God and avoided evil. This reputation demonstrated a commitment to sustaining strong moral and ethical standards, which was more than just a performance for public perception. In a culture rife with immorality and corruption, Job stood out as a model of righteousness. Job had several pleasures in addition to his material possessions. He was highly respected by the community and wielded significant power. Important decisions were made on his word, and his advice was highly valued. His success was the result of both his natural intelligence and his perfect character, which helped drive him to the position of leader. Job showed a balanced balance of righteousness and achievement. Job was also known for his kindness. He shared his fortune with those in need, rather than keeping it for himself. The disadvantaged frequently sought consolation and support in his home, which had a reputation for hospitality. His generous personality solidified his respected standing in the community. When compared to other monarchs of his time, Job was exceptionally nice and fair to his servants. He saw them as more than just labor or property. They were people who deserved to be cared for and respected. Another example of Job's exceptional character was his progressive attitude toward laborers. Job faced the everyday challenge of balancing his material and spiritual commitments. Despite his rigorous management of the company, he never allowed his desire for wealth to impair his moral judgment. This balance demonstrated in a true sense that one can achieve financial success without abandoning their morals. Job prioritized providing a solid education and supportive atmosphere for his children. In addition to addressing their material needs, he tried to instill moral and spiritual values in them. Family reunions were used not just to celebrate, but also to develop bonds and impart spiritual and life lessons. Job's responsible use of natural resources proved his respect for God's creation. He was an early proponent of sustainable agriculture, and he took excellent care of his cattle. This method demonstrated a profound understanding of the connection between humans and the natural world. People constantly looked to Job for wisdom and conflict resolution. He was an objective and discernible dispute mediator who also served as a de facto judge in his hometown. His sharp mind and ability to see beyond surface-level issues made him a great tool in his community's fight for social justice and peace. Job's religious activities extended beyond the ceremonies. He sought God's plan for his life in everything and had a personal relationship with the Almighty. His profound spirituality guided all of his decisions and actions, since it was the source of his moral fortitude and clarity. Regardless of his affluence, Job remained humble and personable. He kept his head down and accepted that God was the source of all his blessings. Many people admired him for his inherent humility, which enabled him to interact with individuals from various socioeconomic backgrounds. Job's life had far-reaching consequences for those beyond his immediate family. He gave generously of his time and money, mentoring neighborhood youth and passing on his knowledge and perspective. His commitment to the future demonstrated that he had a long-term vision and a desire to make a difference. Job's time at Uz demonstrated the power of faith, integrity, and wisdom in creating a meaningful and significant life. He struck an incredible balance in his life between personal prosperity, spiritual depth, and social responsibility, and his story is an encouragement to all. An magnificent scene unfolded in the heavenly sphere. Satan was one of God's earlier sons. This supernatural incident paved the way for a revolutionary test of faith, centered on the life of a blameless man named Job. Deep truths about faith, temptation, and divine purpose would be revealed in the following discourse between God and Satan. Because God knows everything, he asked Satan where he was from to begin the conversation. The enemy's behavior, after circling the globe, suggested a potential role as a human observer and tempter. This exchange paved the way for an ethereal debate over the essence of human faithfulness, specifically Job's. God took pride in diverting Satan's sight to his servant Job. He saw himself as a holy man who avoided evildoers while being honest and ethical. In addition to being a gesture of gratitude, this depiction implicitly addressed Satan, asking if he had encountered anybody equally dedicated in his worldly travels. Satan, ever the master deceiver, refrained from directly questioning Job's honesty. Rather, he questioned whether this fidelity was inspired by something good. His argument was sharp. Only because of God's immense rewards did Job remain faithful. This charge raised fundamental questions about authentic faith. Was Job's dedication motivated by a genuine love for God, or was it simply a reaction to his good fortune? Satan issued an audacious challenge. He claimed that Job, who appeared to be faithful, would openly curse God if he removed his favor and protection from him. In addition to casting doubt on Job's honesty, this worldview claimed that all human faith was essentially conditional and motivated by selfishness. God, in an unexpected move, accepted Satan's challenge. He just placed one condition before allowing his loyal servant to go through trials. We must save Job's life. This supernatural sanction calls into doubt the importance of suffering for the devout, as well as the ultimate objective of adversity. It was apparent that God believed in Job. By allowing Satan to test him, God demonstrated that he trusted his servant's honesty and that he was in control of everything, including the enemy's actions. This divine gesture revealed a deeper purpose that mortal eyes cannot see. The divine test helps us reflect on our particular beliefs. Do we only trust God when things are going well? Is it really love that drives us, or is it the prospect of future benefits? Each believer, on their walk to holiness, must tackle these issues. God's desire to put Job to the test raises more questions about the purpose of suffering for the virtuous. Does facing adversity help us become more devout Christians? How do we maintain honesty when confronted with inexplicable challenges? The story of Job encourages us to consider how we have dealt with similar difficult questions. The conversation between the two heavenly creatures reveals the universe's invisible spiritual struggle. Our earthly issues may be part of a larger story, with cosmic ramifications we don't always fully comprehend. And this serves as a reminder of that. Job's unshakable faith in God is a powerful evidence of God's value for human faithfulness. Even when Satan accused Job of wrongdoing, God did not hesitate to cite him as an example of righteousness. This gives us the strength to persevere, because we know God sees and values our faithfulness. Another thing the heavenly challenge demonstrates is God's infinite understanding, as opposed to Satan's constricted vision. God recognized Job's true goals, whereas Satan could only see his superficial motivations. God, who sees beyond appearances, has a unique awareness of our inner concerns, which this provides as a reminder of. God's decision to allow Job to suffer reveals a profound truth about the nature of faith. Faith is more than just being appreciative. It is also having unwavering trust, especially when faced with adversity. Job's trial would serve as a real-world example of this reality for Satan and future generations. This wonderful episode encourages us to consider our personal stance in the face of adversity. How do we respond to adversity? Do we remain true to ourselves even when we don't understand what is creating our problems? The story of Job tells us that no matter what happens, we must have unwavering faith. The celestial war between God and Satan, centered on Job's existence, lays the groundwork for a theological book that dives deeply into the topics of faith and suffering. It prompts us to consider our personal religion and how we deal with adversity. Job's life took a dramatic change on that day, as it did every other day. As his children cheered, a succession of couriers arrived, each with more horrible news than the previous. A sequence of unexpected and overwhelming disasters challenged Job's faith and resilience. The first courier reported a Sabian attack. The attackers killed and abducted the servants who were caring for Job's animals and donkeys. The attack was both a human and a material calamity. It murdered devoted staff, whom Job most likely considered family. 2 messengers arrived before Job could finish processing the first set of news. On this case, the tragedy descended from above. The sheep and their guards were consumed by fire, which was allegedly sent from God. The reference to God's fire complicates matters further by emphasizing a supposedly supernatural event and raising questions about the nature of divine involvement. The third strike was a Chaldean assault. In a 3-pronged attack, this extremely hostile, nomadic tribe massacred all of Job's camels and their attendants. Camels were crucial for trade and transportation. Thus their loss had a terrible impact on Job's fortune and way of life. The fourth messenger delivered the news of the final and most horrible calamity. While Job's children were celebrating, a powerful wind rushed in from the desert and struck their home. Tragically, all 10 of Job's children died when the building collapsed. This unprecedented human disaster struck Job where it stung the most, his family, and eclipsed all of his previous monetary losses. Notable is the speed and severity with which these disasters occurred. Job's whole assets, including money, servants, and most sadly, children, were taken away in a second. The devastation was tremendous, and Job lost all that had once defined him. Job's initial response to these setbacks displays his character and faith. Job's response was one of genuine anguish and devotion, rather than condemnation or despair. He ripped his clothes to shreds, shaved his head, and performed other traditional acts of anguish before bowing down to worship. It is often assumed that Job's statements during this time of intense anguish indicate unwavering confidence. This statement demonstrates a profound recognition of God's sovereignty, as well as the transitory nature of all possession. Job did not blame God for his losses. Despite his tremendous sorrow, Job did not sin by accusing God of wrongdoing, as stated in the text. This response calls into question the notion that true faith is dependent on good fortune or never-ending benefits. Job's tragedy raises profound questions about the nature of pain and its relationship to religion. How can one maintain faith in the face of such tragic losses? True faith, according to Job's response, is not based on earthly goods, but rather on a deeper understanding of who God is and our place in his relationship. Furthermore, Job's extreme agony prompts us to consider the importance of adversity in the lives of the faithful. Does facing adversity help us become more devout Christians? In the midst of such awful circumstances, how can we find meaning and perhaps even progress? The unexpected course of events in Job's life challenges our understanding of divine justice. What drives a virtuous, God-fearing man to endure such excruciating pain? At its core, the book of Job presents this quandary, which even modern Christians and theologians find difficult to resolve. Another lesson to be learned from Job's story is the fragility of both life and financial possessions. Everything we cherish can vanish in the blink of an eye. This reality should make us reconsider our priorities and the dependability of the people and things we rely on. Job's sorrow was profoundly emotional, spiritual, and physical. Nobody can completely comprehend the sorrow he must have suffered following the deaths of his children. He must have a strong relationship with God in order to maintain his faith despite such a tragic loss. The catastrophes that hit Job, which appeared to be planned by Satan but were actually permitted by God, raise serious questions about the nature of evil and the limits of God's authority. If God is both good and all-powerful, how can evil exist? The narrative of Job does not provide easy answers, but it does inspire us to think more closely about these mysteries. After the initial wave of tragedies has passed, God and Satan resume their pivotal discourse in the celestial realm. This celestial talk has a heightened intensity, similar to the last one. Once again, God stresses Job's unwavering integrity, demonstrating how he remained righteous while enduring severe losses. This heavenly observation serves as an indirect challenge to Satan, as his prophecies about Job's conditional faith have come true. However, Satan remains unconquered. His claim that the test was overly simple is persuasive. Next, he proposes an even more radical experiment that may have an impact on Job's physical condition. Satan says, "Skin for skin," suggesting that a man will sacrifice himself to save his own life. This new concept raises the stakes of the divine challenge by focusing on the strength of the human will in the midst of excruciating physical agony. Satan is given clear divine license to hurt Job, but only on the condition that he does not die. This heavenly concession demonstrates both God's sovereignty and the limits imposed on evil's power. Everything is now in place for a more extreme test of faith, one that will push the limits of human dedication in the face of excruciating pain. Job is suddenly seized with a serious disease. Sores, both painful and nasty, cover his entire body. from his feet to his hairline. Job's horrible condition has reduced him to sitting among the ashes and scraping his sores with a shard of shattered crockery. He must have been in great pain, and this vivid image demonstrates how serious his condition was. Job's wife speaks up about all of his pain, expressing despondency and incredulity. Her words and reaction are in stark contrast to Job's unshakable faith, showcasing his amazing spiritual strength even more. The sensible and firm response that Job delivers to his wife sticks out. Gently reprimanding her, he inquires why they should receive nothing but wonderful things from God, and nothing but hardship. This profound statement demonstrates that you have matured and recognized that God is in control, and that both good and evil things can occur simultaneously. Even in this severe situation, Job did not transgress verbally, as the Bible emphasizes repeatedly. At this period of great sorrow, 3 of Job's friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar, appear. They depart their homelands to console and sympathize with Job after learning of the calamities that have befallen him. They make a gentle initial move. They observe Job on the ground in silence for 7 days and nights, realizing the severity of his suffering. This scene of empathetic stillness marks a significant turning point in the drama. There will soon be a deluge of words, but for now, there is serenity. Soon, Job's friends, motivated by a genuine desire to help, will begin to offer their opinions on what is going on and what they believe Job should do. Their words, while well-intentioned, will generate a heated intellectual and religious debate. When Job speaks up to criticize the day he was born, the silence is finally broken. He can no longer hide his pain. Following his emotional lament, he and his friends have a series of serious and often acrimonious debates. Everyone will give their own viewpoint on Job's pain and try to help him through it. As the first to speak, Eliphaz builds his case from the ground up, relying on his own life experiences and mystical insights. Although he begins lightly, he soon develops a line of reasoning that will be evident in every speech his friends give. The common belief that pain is always the result of sin will be tested by Job's real-life experiences. As the discussion proceeds, Bildad and Zophar join in, arguing that Job deserved to be punished for his misdeeds. The juxtaposition between their increasingly aggressive arguments and Job's protestations of innocence causes an increase in mental and emotional tension. Job's confidence in his own virtue remains unshaken. Along with maintaining his innocence, he begins to question God's justice. He wants to know why he is going through all of this pain, and his words reflect that. Job begs God to hear him out. All he wants is an answer from the Almighty. With each fresh round of speeches, the anxiety builds. Because they can't believe Job could suffer anguish without shame, Job's friends condemn him more and more. In contrast, Job's assertions of guilt and protests to the unfairness of his situation become more harsh. This philosophical and theological standoff has set the stage for a spectacular intervention. The story is tense because human wisdom cannot employ arguments and discussions to address Job's pain. In the midst of all this aggravation and never-ending search for solutions, the stage is set for something truly spectacular to occur. A new voice will enter the discourse, bringing a unique and thought-provoking perspective. At a critical point in the story, Job and his companions had a furious disagreement. While in excruciating anguish, Job resolutely maintains his innocence. Despite his sorrow, his voice is filled with enthusiasm. He not only remains faithful to himself, but he also publicly disputes the widely held assumption that his anguish is divine retribution for his crimes. While Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar adopt various approaches, their arguments are remarkably similar. Eliphaz makes claims based on his own life experiences and spiritual visions. A fundamental concept of Bildad is the return of ancestral knowledge and practices. Zophar, the most impetuous of the three, insists Job is guilty. As the conversation heats up, Job is fighting both physical agony and increasing uncertainty among his friends. His reactions become increasingly passionate, verging on pessimism at times. Anger and a desire to take his case to God fuel his appeals for justice. You can feel Job's irritation with his soothers. He dismisses their medical competence and reassuring words as pointless. Their insensitivity further isolates him from others, and he is disillusioned by their lack of understanding and compassion. Job laments his inability to understand why he is suffering so much. Not because he doesn't believe, but because he wants to understand how God works. He questions divine justice. Even though he is shaken by his beliefs, his questions are daring and even rebellious. Job's speeches are where the concept of a heavenly advocate or mediator first arises. He desires someone could explain his condition and prove his innocence before God. The requirement for a third person to mediate suggests theological conceptions that may evolve in various faiths. Throughout the argument, Job shows evidence of increased confidence in his eventual victory. Despite his apparent despondency, he says, "I know that my Redeemer lives, and that in the end, he will stand on the earth." This remarkable proclamation of faith in the face of hardship would become one of the book's most recognized and memorable passages. Because they cannot believe Job's denial of guilt, his friends condemn him more and more fiercely. They see Job's denial of accountability as pride and disobedience against God. Every time they converse, the distance between their perspectives and Job's develops even further. As a result, Job begins to truly consider how God's wisdom and justice function. Even though he understands that humans cannot comprehend God's secrets, he continues to seek answers. There is a philosophical standstill in the discussion. The circular reasoning and repeated charges demonstrate humanity's inability to solve the problem of unfair suffering. Given the current impasse, a divine intervention may be possible. Tensions rise as the conversation progresses. Job develops a strong desire to meet with God personally. He wants to come across as someone seeking understanding and justice, not as a guilty criminal. Job's determination to maintain his integrity in the face of constant accusations and anguish is a powerful proof of his faith. His tremendous bravery is on display when he rejects his wife's advice that he curse God and die. Job's statements also reflect a shift in his perspective on God. His faith is unwavering, even when he challenges God's impartiality. As he ages, his basic and impersonal view of God evolves into one that is more nuanced and intimate. The urge for a conclusion grows as the argument progresses. When the boundaries of human understanding are revealed, a massive intervention beyond human argumentation will occur. The development of tension during the arguments lays the groundwork for anticipation. Job and his associates had exhausted all imaginable lines of reasoning, leaving the reader waiting for a clear conclusion. Just when things are becoming hot, a new voice emerges, claiming to have something new to contribute in this never-ending debate. Following the heated arguments, there was an unexpected break in the silence. A voice from above rose from the storm. This heavenly intervention marks a watershed moment in Job's tale, shedding new insight on the age-old problem of injustice and suffering. God's response did not provide any direct justifications or explanations for Job's suffering. Instead, he asked a series of rhetorical questions to demonstrate his unrivaled wisdom and power in creating and preserving the universe. This opening question established the tone for the rest of the conversation. His speech detailed the majesty and complexity of God's creation. In his speech, he discussed the planet's bedrock, ocean limitations, sunrises, ocean depths, and meteorological mysteries. With each investigation, God's immense wisdom and power were revealed in contrast to our finite capacities. During his discourse, God did not limit himself to natural topics. To emphasize his control over all of creation, from the smallest organisms to the most colossal, he mentioned beautiful and mighty beasts such as Leviathan and Behemoth. The descriptions presented here emphasize God's enormous power even more. God did not precisely explain Job's suffering in his response. Rather, it turned the conversation's focus away from Job's personal troubles and onto a general cosmic order and supernatural knowledge beyond mortal comprehension. At first, Job's reaction was one of abject humility in the face of such a massive display of heavenly wisdom and might. "I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know," he said, confessing his ignorance and the boundaries of his comprehension. The heavenly declaration did not call into question Job's honesty or the justice of his suffering. Instead, it inspired Job to consider his circumstances in the context of God's larger cosmic purpose, which is beyond human comprehension. This strategy provides a novel perspective on the topic of pain. The companions of Job were also anxious about God's intervention. He chastised them for failing to speak truthfully about him, just as Job did. In the face of Job's friends' repeated accusations, this heavenly confirmation of his honesty provided enormous vindication. God's response to Job did not include a philosophical answer to the subject of evil or suffering. Instead, it urged people to accept God despite their lack of comprehension of his methods by reaffirming God's sovereignty and wisdom. The encounter with God had a profound impact on Job, altering his viewpoint and outlook on life. Realizing the vast depth of divine wisdom, he moved away from seeking explanations and answers and toward simply appreciating them. His final words, "My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you," reveal a profound and new understanding of God. Job felt profound sorrow following his experience with the divine, not for the offenses that would have caused him anguish, but for his own smallness in comparison to God's magnificence. Resignation in the form of dust and ashes marked a significant shift in his perspective. God not only answered Job's requests, but he also established an important precedent in religious writings. It demonstrated that God does not always respond to queries with direct answers, but rather with invites to consider things from other perspectives. God underlined a clear distinction between knowledge and wisdom in his word to Job. Divine wisdom is beyond human comprehension and encompasses all creation, but human knowledge is limited. While God's response did not provide a clear explanation for Job's misery, it did provide an equally essential cosmic perspective that placed human suffering within a larger cosmic context. This gave Job a new perspective on his misery, but it did nothing to relieve it. With this angelic intervention, Job's spiritual path took a new turn, and the intellectual debate came to an end. It paved the way for the final restoration, both materially and, more crucially, in terms of a deeper and more developed understanding of God and his relationship to him. Restoration is the final stage of Job's tale, which begins with a major supernatural intervention. Not only does this epilogue conclude Job's story, but it also strongly reinforces God's compassion and faith. The restoration process began with a supernatural pronouncement about Job's honesty. God rebuked Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar for not speaking accurately about him. Unlike Job, this supernatural proof finally vindicated Job, proving that he was correct in insisting on his innocence. God commanded Job's companions to sacrifice as a form of retribution. He also made an unusual vow to accept Job's request on behalf of his friends, and he urged Job to pray for them. in addition to restoring relationships with his friends. Job's act of forgiveness demonstrated his character. Job completed a significant amount of material restoration. The Torah states that God quadrupled Job's wealth. His herds expanded, his wealth reappeared, and his social standing was cemented. This material abundance was a clear sign of God's favor. In addition to the gain, Job was blessed with a new family. He had the same number of children as before the disasters, 7 sons and 3 daughters. Job's 3 daughters, Jemimah, Keziah, and Karen-Hapik, are selected and praised as the country's most lovely ladies. As a fascinating aside, Job did something fairly unusual for his time. He left an inheritance to his daughters as well as their brothers. After going through everything he did, Job may have had a fresh appreciation for life and his loved ones, which might be indicative of his generosity. Job was likewise blessed with an extended life. According to the Bible, he lived for 140 years after his restoration, seeing the 4th generation of his family. Because of his long life, Job was able to enjoy the benefits of his restoration and leave a lasting imprint. Job's restoration did not alleviate his anguish, but it did provide him with a new perspective on things. Job's ordeals resulted in a deeper understanding of God and his own faith, as well as the restoration of his material belongings. The epilogue to Job's story serves as an effective reminder of God's goodness and sovereignty. This demonstrates that individuals who remain devoted can endure even the most terrible and long-lasting of trials. Job's restoration also presents a more nuanced view of material blessings. Satan blamed Job's early success on his loyalty, but God eventually restored him as a testament to his integrity, which he had proved through his hardships. Not Job's demands or arguments, but his humble encounter with God were the means of his restoration. This would show that genuine repair is brought about by God's grace rather than human efforts. Curious about the nature of God's reward? Job's story concludes with thought-provoking questions. Even though Job had a lot of good fortune, his experience demonstrates that being loyal to God does not imply being wealthy. Job enjoyed a long and fruitful life, according to the account. This statement denotes not just a long life, but also a happy and fulfilled one. Job returned home not just monetarily better off, but also spiritually stronger. For those going through difficult situations, the book of Job's restoration epilogue provides hope and perspective. It serves as a reminder that there is always hope for a better future, even during the darkest of circumstances. The story of Job's fall and subsequent redemption is an enduring testament to God's faithfulness and the strength of faith to persist in the face of insurmountable adversity. The tale of Job's journey from great riches to tremendous suffering and finally back to restoration gives us important lessons about overcoming fear and hardship. The Job story is older than Jesus, but it contains many of the same teachings that Jesus taught many years later. We can draw strength from Job's tenacity as we face our own concerns and troubles. We can find the strength to endure, as he did, even when circumstances were hopeless. You will have trouble in this world, but have heart. I have conquered the world, he said to us. According to this hopeful message, we can overcome misfortune in the same way that Job did. We learn from Job's experience that doubting God is not a sign of disbelief, but rather a normal part of a real relationship with him. Jesus encouraged us to seek solutions by using phrases such as, "Ask and it will be given to you," "Seek and you will find," and "Knock and the door will be opened to you." Do not be afraid to convey your uncertainties and concerns to God. All of these things will be granted to you if you seek first his kingdom and righteousness, as Jesus stated, and Job's restoration serves as a reminder of this. God will provide for us. But it will not always be in the way we expect when we maintain our integrity and faith, like Job did. How can you find strength to face your fears today? By drawing on Job's story and Jesus' teachings. How can you draw closer to God and increase your trust in Him when times are tough? Remember that, like Job, you may succeed despite suffering. By increasing your faith and learning more about God, stand firm in the face of fear. Use this time to become closer to God and strengthen your faith. Subscribe to the channel and switch on notifications if you were moved by this material and want to learn more about conquering anxieties with faith. Let us continue our investigation of teachings that inspire us to trust God with courage.